What's a school rumor you heard as a kid that turned out to be true years later? In 7th grade, everyone whispered about Mr. Kellerman, our science teacher. He was young, maybe 26, with kind eyes and a habit of staying after school to help struggling students. While other teachers rushed to their cars at 3:15, Mr. Kellerman would be in his classroom until 6, explaining photosynthesis for the 5th time or helping kids catch up on missed assignments. Roosevelt Middle School was the kind of place where rumors spread faster than wildfire. The building was old, built in the 1960s with narrow hallways and creaky floors that amplified every whispered conversation. During lunch, we'd huddle in corners of the cafeteria, trading theories like currency. Mr. Kellerman had become our favorite mystery. The rumor started when Brianna Chen claimed she saw him crying in his car after parent-teacher conferences. She swore she watched for 10 full minutes as he sat behind the wheel, shoulders shaking. Then Madison Wright said she heard him on the phone during his planning period, voice breaking as he said, "I can't keep doing this much longer." Angela Russo swore she saw him taking pills during lunch. Not like vitamins. Real medication from an orange prescription bottle that he tried to hide behind his coffee mug. Kids being kids, we created elaborate theories. Maybe he was secretly broke, working 3 jobs to pay off student loans. Maybe his girlfriend dumped him and he was having a breakdown. Maybe he hated teaching and was planning to quit mid-semester. But Tessa Valdez had the darkest theory of all. "I think he's sick," she whispered during lunch, her voice barely audible over the cafeteria noise. Like, really sick. Terminal sick. My mom had cancer and she cried in her car too. She thought we couldn't see her, but I watched from my bedroom window every night. We all rolled our eyes. Tessa was dramatic about everything. Last month, she'd convinced half the cafeteria that the lunch lady was poisoning the meatloaf because she'd seen her adding suspicious white powder. It was salt. The month before that, she claimed the janitor was actually an undercover cop investigating a drug ring. He'd been mopping the same hallway for 20 minutes. "He's 26, I scoffed, stabbing my mystery meat with a plastic fork. "Young people don't get cancer. That's old people disease." "My cousin did," Tessa shot back, her dark eyes flashing with conviction. "She was 24 when they found the tumor. Dead by 25. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Even for 7th graders, death felt too heavy for lunch period conversation. The rumor evolved and spread like a virus through our grade. Soon, kids claimed they'd seen Mr. Kellerman taking pills during class, sneaking them behind his desk when he thought no one was looking. Others swore he was losing weight, his shirts hanging looser, his face looking gaunt under the fluorescent classroom lights. Rebecca Torres insisted she'd heard him throwing up in the faculty bathroom during 3rd period. Marcus Fleming, who sat in the front row of our science class, claimed he'd seen Mr. Kellerman's hands shaking while he wrote on the whiteboard. "Like my grandpa when he had Parkinson's," Marcus had whispered during passing period. The marker kept wobbling. Jennifer Park said she'd overheard Mr. Kellerman telling the principal he needed to leave early for appointments 3 times that week. "Doctor appointments," she clarified dramatically. "No one has that many regular appointments." By October, the evidence was mounting. Samantha Lee noticed he'd stopped bringing lunch from home and barely touched the cafeteria food he bought. "He just pushes it around his plate," she reported. "My uncle did that when he was getting chemo." Derek Williams claimed he'd seen Mr. Kellerman sleeping at his desk during lunch period, head down on his arms like he was exhausted. "Not grading papers," Derek specified. "Actually sleeping, snoring and everything." The most damning evidence came from Alexis Young, whose mother worked in the main office. "Mom saw Mr. Kellerman filling out medical forms," she whispered. "Lots of them. And she heard him on the phone with someone about insurance coverage for treatments." By December, half the 7th grade was convinced our favorite teacher was dying. The evidence seemed overwhelming when you added it all up. The mysterious phone calls, the crying, the weight loss, the pills, the medical forms, the exhaustion, the way he'd sometimes stop mid-sentence during lessons, staring out the window like he was somewhere else entirely. The way he'd smile at us with such sadness in his eyes, like he was trying to memorize our faces. We started treating him differently. Kids who never participated began raising their hands more often. Class clowns stopped making jokes during his lessons. Even Tommy Brennan, who'd been sent to the principal's office 4 times that semester, became a model student in science class. "We should be nicer to him," Brianna said one day after lunch. "If he's really sick, these might be his last month's teaching." The sentiment spread through our class like a secret mission. We began leaving small gifts on his desk. An apple, a cookie from the cafeteria, a drawing of the solar system. Anonymous thank you notes appeared in his mailbox. During parent-teacher conferences, our parents heard nothing but glowing reports about how well-behaved and engaged we'd become in science class. Mr. Kellerman seemed puzzled by our sudden transformation, but grateful. "You've all been exceptional this semester," he told us the week before winter break. "Teaching you has been the highlight of my day." That made it worse. If teaching us was the highlight of his day and he was dying, then we were witnessing something beautiful and tragic. Then, after Christmas break, Mr. Kellerman was gone. The substitute, Mrs. Rodriguez, was waiting in his classroom when we filed in for 1st period. She was older, strict, with reading glasses that made her look perpetually disapproving. The fun science posters Mr. Kellerman had put up were already gone, replaced with generic educational charts about the periodic table. "Mr. Kellerman has taken a leave of absence for personal reasons," she announced, without looking up from her lesson plan. "We'll be returning to standard curriculum immediately. No more experiments, no more group projects, just textbook pages and worksheets." The classroom felt different without him, colder. The plants he'd kept on the windowsill were already dying. His desk had been cleared out completely, leaving only a generic nameplate that read Substitute Teacher. The motivational posters he'd hung around the room, Science is Magic That Works, and Question Everything, had been replaced with rules about classroom behavior and safety procedures. We sat in stunned silence as Mrs. Rodriguez distributed worksheets about atomic structure. No one asked questions. No one cracked jokes. The energy that had made science class exciting was gone, replaced by the soul-crushing monotony we'd grown accustomed to in other subjects. At lunch, we held an impromptu memorial meeting. I knew it, Tessa said, her voice breaking. I knew he was sick. Maybe he's getting treatment somewhere, Madison offered hopefully. Maybe he'll come back. People don't take leaves of absence to get better, Derek said grimly. They take them to die. Don't say that, Brianna snapped, but her eyes were red. For the rest of the week, our former enthusiasm evaporated. Mrs. Rodriguez tried to maintain order, but she couldn't understand why we'd gone from model students to sullen teenagers overnight. She interpreted our grief as defiance and began assigning detention for the smallest infractions. Mr. Kellerman never gave us detention, Tommy muttered one day after being written up for asking to use the bathroom. Mr. Kellerman isn't here, Mrs. Rodriguez replied coldly. I am. For months we asked about him. The principal would only say he was taking care of his health, which felt like confirmation of our worst fears. Other teachers changed the subject whenever his name came up. Even Mrs. Patterson, the secretary who usually gossiped with students about everything from cafeteria drama to which teachers were dating, went completely silent whenever someone mentioned Mr. Kellerman's name. Mr. Chen, the history teacher who'd been friends with Mr. Kellerman, looked genuinely sad when students asked about him. He's dealing with some difficult personal circumstances, was all he'd say. We're hoping he'll be able to return soon. But weeks turned into months and soon became never. We created memorial theories to fill the void. Maybe he'd moved to a hospice facility across the country. Maybe he was getting experimental treatment that required him to relocate. Maybe he'd already died and the school wasn't telling us because we were too young to handle the truth. Spring semester was miserable without him. Mrs. Rodriguez taught science like she was reading ingredients off a cereal box. No passion, no curiosity, no wonder. We memorized formulas and definitions, but the magic was gone. The subject that had once felt like discovering secrets about the universe became just another class to endure. Some kids tried to reach out to him. Jennifer Park convinced her older sister to drive by his apartment complex, but the manager said he'd moved out months ago with no forwarding address. Marcus Fleming asked his mother to call the school district, but they wouldn't release any information about former employees. By the end of 7th grade, Mr. Kellerman had become a ghost story we told ourselves. The teacher who'd cared too much, who'd given everything to his students, who'd probably paid the ultimate price for his dedication. By 8th grade, we'd moved on. New teachers, new drama, new rumors to obsess over. High school applications and teenage romance replaced our concern for a teacher who'd vanished from our lives as suddenly as he'd entered them. I forgot about Mr. Kellerman entirely until 15 years later, when I was working as a nurse at Children's Hospital. It was a Tuesday night shift, around 2 a.m., when I heard a familiar voice in the hallway. Deep, patient, with that same gentle tone I remembered from science class. At first, I thought I was imagining it. Exhaustion playing tricks on my mind during another 12-hour shift, but then I heard it again, clearer this time. The new treatment protocol should help reduce the nausea, the voice was saying. We'll monitor his levels closely and adjust as needed. I peeked around the corner and froze. Mr. Kellerman stood outside room 314, but he looked different. Older, obviously. 15 years had passed, but something else had changed. He wore scrubs instead of his old button-down shirts and khaki pants. His hair was shorter, silver at the temples, and there was a confidence in his posture that hadn't been there before. A stethoscope hung around his neck and he carried a tablet instead of the stack of papers I remembered him always juggling. He was talking to a woman who was clearly a parent, exhausted, worried, clinging to every word he said. Behind her, a man in rumpled clothes nodded along, occasionally asking questions in a voice thick with emotion. Dr. Kellerman, the woman was saying, when will we know if the treatment is working? Dr. Kellerman, the title hit me like a physical blow. We should have preliminary results within 2 weeks, he replied. I know waiting is agonizing, but try to focus on the fact that your son is responding well to the initial treatment. His numbers are moving in the right direction. The parents thanked him repeatedly before disappearing into the room. Dr. Kellerman stood in the hallway for a moment, updating notes on his tablet, and I realized this was my chance. Excuse me, I said, approaching cautiously. Are you David Kellerman? You used to teach at Roosevelt Middle School? His head snapped up, and for a moment he looked exactly like the young teacher I remembered. His face lit up with recognition and something that looked like joy. I remember you, he said, smiling broadly. You sat in the 3rd row, always asked questions about the lab experiments. You wanted to know why mixing baking soda and vinegar created a reaction. I was amazed he remembered me so specifically. I'd been one of 30 students in his class, yet he could recall exactly where I'd sat and what I'd been curious about. What are you doing here? I asked, though the answer was becoming obvious. I'm a pediatric oncologist now, he replied. Been working here for 8 years. Started as a resident, now I'm attending physician. The pieces clicked together in my mind like a puzzle solving itself, but the picture they formed was nothing like what I'd expected. The rumors, I said slowly. In 7th grade, we thought you were sick. His expression grew serious, thoughtful. I wasn't sick, he said quietly. My son was. The hallway suddenly felt too small. I stared at him, processing this information that rewrote everything I thought I knew about that year. Your son? Tyler, he said, his voice softening. He was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia when he was 4. just before I started teaching at Roosevelt. My heart dropped into my stomach. The phone calls we heard, the crying in your car, hospital updates, insurance battles, test results, treatment schedules. He leaned against the wall, suddenly looking tired. Those 2 years of teaching were the hardest of my life. Tyler was in and out of treatment constantly. Some days I'd get called away for emergencies. Other days I'd spend my entire lunch break on the phone with his oncology team. The pills Angela saw you taking? Anti-anxiety medication, he admitted. My doctor prescribed them when Tyler's condition got worse. I was having panic attacks in the middle of lessons. The weight loss? Stress. I was surviving on coffee and adrenaline, sleeping maybe 3 hours a night when Tyler was in the hospital. He paused, which was most nights. I felt tears forming as the reality of what we'd witnessed 15 years ago became clear. The medical forms Alexis's mom saw you filling out? Insurance paperwork for Tyler's treatment, experimental therapy approvals, hospital admission forms. His voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes even after all these years. Childhood cancer generates an incredible amount of paperwork. Is he? I couldn't finish the question. Mr. Kellerman's face broke into the most genuine smile I'd ever seen. He's 21 now, pre-med at Stanford, wants to be a pediatric oncologist like his old man. I felt tears spilling over. That's why you left teaching. Tyler's treatment got more intensive in January. He needed a bone marrow transplant, and the recovery period required constant supervision. I couldn't be there for him and my students, so I made a choice. He paused, studying my face. But watching what he went through, seeing how the doctors and nurses became our lifeline during the darkest period of our lives, it changed everything. I went back to school, did my pre-med requirements at night, then medical school. You became a doctor because of your son's cancer. I became the doctor I needed when Tyler was sick, he corrected. The one who would stay late to explain test results in terms parents could understand. Who would answer parent phone calls at 2 a.m. when they were panicking about side effects? Who understood that behind every sick child is a terrified family trying to navigate the most complex medical system in the world? A nurse walked by, nodding at Mr. Kellerman. Dr. Kellerman, the Pratt family is asking for you. Be right there, he said, then turned back to me. I should go. But I'm so glad I ran into you. How are the others? Tessa with the wild theories? I laughed, despite the emotional weight of our conversation. She's an investigative journalist now. Turns out her instincts were usually right. Of course they were, he chuckled. She always saw things others missed. Even when her conclusions were wrong, her observations were spot on. As he started to walk away, I called after him. Mr. Kellerman? Dr. Kellerman? David's fine, he said. Thank you for everything you did for us back then. Even when you were going through hell with Tyler, you still cared about us. His eyes grew soft, and for a moment, he looked like the young teacher I remembered. Teaching you kids was what kept me sane. When everything else was falling apart, when Tyler was having bad days, when the treatments weren't working, when I didn't know if I'd still have a son at the end of the week, I had those 6 hours a day where I could focus on something other than medical charts and treatment plans. You probably saved me more than I saved you. After he left, I stood in that hallway for a long time, thinking about rumors and truth, about the stories we tell ourselves when we don't have all the information, about how the worst experiences can sometimes lead to the most meaningful outcomes. The next week, I did something I'd never done before. I looked up my old classmates on social media and started a group message. Does anyone remember the rumors about Mr. Kellerman? I typed. Within minutes, responses flooded in. Tessa. I knew he was sick. Wait, was he actually sick? Brianna. I still remember seeing him cry in his car. It broke my heart. Madison. Whatever happened to him anyway? I always wondered. Angela. Those pills I saw him taking, were we right about him being sick? I told them everything. About Tyler, about the bone marrow transplant, about medical school, about how our favorite teacher had become Dr. Kellerman, saving other children's lives at the same hospital where his own son had fought for his. The responses were immediate and emotional. Tessa, I'm crying. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Brianna, he was fighting for his son's life and still stayed after school to help us with homework. Madison, we need to do something. Send flowers? A card? Something to let him know we remember. Marcus, I feel terrible that we thought he was dying when really his kid was the one who was sick. Jennifer, wait, so when we were being extra nice to him that semester because we thought he was terminal, he was actually going through the worst time of his life? Derek, no wonder he said teaching us was the highlight of his day. We were probably the only normal part of his life. But Tessa, ever the journalist, had the best idea. I'm writing a story about this, about how rumors can be truth, even when we get the details wrong, about teachers who are heroes even when we don't know it, about how the worst experiences can lead to the most beautiful outcomes. I connected her with Dr. Kellerman, who agreed to be interviewed. 3 months later, Tessa's article was published in the city newspaper. The science teacher who became a doctor, how one man's tragedy became his purpose. The article detailed everything. Tyler's diagnosis, the family's struggle during those 2 years at Roosevelt, David's decision to leave teaching for medical school, and Tyler's current status as a healthy pre-med student, following in his father's footsteps. The article went viral within hours. Local news picked it up. By the end of the week, it had been shared across multiple states. The hospital's social media accounts were flooded with comments from former students sharing their memories of Dr. Kellerman's teaching days. But more importantly, the hospital was flooded with donations for the pediatric oncology ward. People who'd read the story wanted to support the department where the former teacher now saved lives. Within a month, they'd raised enough money to fund a new family support center. The best part came when Dr. Kellerman called me a week after the article was published. I can't believe you all did this, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Tyler read the article. He called me crying, happy tears. He said he never realized how many people had been rooting for us during those years. You deserve recognition, I told him. You changed our lives, and now you're changing other lives. There's something else, he said. The hospital administration read Tessa's article. They want to start a program where medical students and residents spend time in schools, teaching science and talking about careers in medicine. They want me to head it up. That's perfect. I was wondering, he paused, would Roosevelt Middle School be interested in being our pilot program? I smiled, remembering the kid I used to be, sitting in his classroom, fascinated by every experiment, never imagining that my favorite teacher's real story was far more complex than any rumor we'd created. I think they'd love that. 6 months later, I was back at Roosevelt Middle School for the first time since graduating. The building looked smaller than I remembered, but the hallways still creaked the same way. Mrs. Patterson was still working the front desk, now with silver hair and reading glasses, but the same warm smile. You're here for the medical program presentation, she said, recognizing me immediately. Dr. Kellerman mentioned you'd be coming. It's so wonderful that you all reconnected. The current 7th grade science classroom was in the same location where Mr. Kellerman had taught us 15 years earlier. The desks were arranged differently, and new posters covered the walls, but the windows were the same ones he'd stared out of during those difficult months. Dr. Kellerman arrived with Tyler and 2 medical students. Tyler was tall, serious-looking, with his father's kind eyes and gentle demeanor. At 21, he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd faced mortality and won. This is where it all started, Dr. Kellerman told Tyler, looking around the classroom, where I learned that teaching and healing aren't so different. The presentation was incredible. Dr. Kellerman talked about the path from teaching to medicine, but Tyler stole the show. He spoke candidly about his childhood cancer experience, about how his father's career change had been inspired by their family's journey, about how patients could become healers. My dad always says that his students saved him during the hardest time of our lives, Tyler told the 7th graders. He'd come home from the hospital and tell me about the experiments you guys did, the questions you asked, the way you made him remember why he loved science. You gave him hope when he needed it most. The students were mesmerized. These weren't typical career day presentations about salary and job security. This was real talk about purpose, about how tragedy could become calling, about how helping others helped heal yourself. After the presentation, students surrounded Tyler with questions. Were you scared? One girl asked. Terrified, he replied honestly. But having a dad who understood science helped. He could explain what was happening to my body in ways that made sense. Knowledge made it less scary. Do you remember being sick? Another student wanted to know. Some parts. I remember being tired a lot. I remember the hospital smelled weird. But I also remember the nurses who made me laugh, and the doctors who talked to me like I was smart enough to understand. That's the kind of doctor I want to be. A boy in the back row, who'd been quiet during the entire presentation, finally raised his hand. Dr. Kellerman, he said. Is it hard, being a doctor when you know what it's like to almost lose someone? Dr. Kellerman considered the question carefully. It makes it harder and easier at the same time, he said. Harder because I know exactly what families are going through. I can see my own fear reflected in parents' eyes, but easier because I know how to help them navigate that fear. I know which explanations actually comfort people and which ones just confuse them more. Another student asked, would you change anything if you could go back and make Tyler not get sick? Tyler and his father exchanged looks. That's a tough question, Tyler said. Obviously, I wish I hadn't been sick. But if I hadn't been sick, my dad wouldn't have become a doctor. And if he hadn't become a doctor, he wouldn't have saved all the kids he saved. So maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to. As the students filed out, chattering excitedly about medical school and career possibilities, one girl lingered behind. She was small for her age, with serious eyes that reminded me of myself at that age. Dr. Kellerman, she said quietly, my little brother has cancer. The doctors say he's going to be okay, but my parents cry sometimes when they think I can't see them. Dr. Kellerman knelt down to her eye level, and I saw the same gentle patience he'd shown us 15 years earlier. What's your brother's name? Caleb. He's 6. Caleb is lucky to have a big sister who notices things and cares about him, he said. And your parents aren't crying because they've given up hope. They're crying because they love him so much, and love makes us brave and scared at the same time. Really? Really. And if your family ever needs someone to talk to, someone who understands what it's like, you can ask your parents to call me. He handed her a business card. Thank you, she whispered. After she left, Dr. Kellerman sat at the teacher's desk, the same desk where he'd taught us about photosynthesis and chemical reactions, and the scientific method 15 years earlier. Full circle, I said. More than you know, he replied. Tyler's applying for a summer internship here at Children's Hospital. If he gets it, he'll be working in the same hospital where he spent 2 years of his childhood fighting for his life. How does that feel? Like everything happens for a reason, he said. Even the terrible things. Especially the terrible things. As we walked out of the school together, past the same cafeteria where we'd spread rumors about him, past the same hallways where he'd hurried to answer phone calls about his son's condition, I thought about Tessa's theory from 7th grade. She'd been right about Mr. Kellerman being connected to serious illness, just wrong about who was sick. She'd been right about the crying, the phone calls, the weight loss from stress and sleepless nights. She'd been right about the medications and the medical appointments and the exhaustion. She'd even been right that it was life or death serious. We'd just gotten the perspective wrong. Dr. Kellerman, I said as we reached the parking lot, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever think about what would have happened if Tyler hadn't gotten sick? If you'd never left teaching? He considered this for a long moment, keys dangling from his hand. I think I would have been a good teacher for 30 years, he said finally. I would have inspired kids to love science. helped them with homework, maybe influenced a few to pursue careers in education or research. And that would have been a meaningful life. He unlocked his car, a practical sedan instead of the old beat-up Honda Civic he'd driven when we were kids. But I never would have saved the lives I've saved as a doctor. Tyler never would have found his calling either. And maybe most importantly, I never would have learned that the worst thing that happens to you can become the best thing you do with your life. As I watched him drive away, I realized that the rumor we'd spread in 7th grade had been both completely wrong and absolutely true. Mr. Kellerman wasn't dying, but someone he loved was. He wasn't keeping secrets because he was ashamed. He was protecting his privacy during the most vulnerable time of his life. He wasn't taking pills because he was sick. He was taking them because someone he loved was sick. And that was almost worse. The next week, I got a text from Tyler. Tessa had connected us through social media after her article was published. "Thank you for remembering my dad," the message read. "And thank you for inspiring Tessa to write that article. It helped me understand why he always talked about his teaching days with such love, even though they were the hardest years of his life." I wrote back, "Your dad saved my curiosity about science. He probably changed the trajectory of half our class without knowing it." "He definitely changed mine," Tyler replied. "I'm starting medical school in the fall. Pediatric oncology program, obviously. Following in his footsteps. More like walking beside him. He says there's room for more than one Dr. Kellerman at Children's Hospital." Over the following months, I kept in touch with both Tyler and Dr. Kellerman. Tyler sent updates from Stanford, photos of study groups, stories about particularly difficult classes, excitement about getting accepted into his top-choice medical school. Dr. Kellerman shared stories from the hospital, patients he'd treated, families he'd helped, medical students he was mentoring. He also told me about the education program, which had expanded to 5 schools in the district. "Every time I go into a classroom now," he said during one of our phone conversations, "I remember why I love teaching. But now I can combine it with medicine. I get to plant seeds about healthcare careers in kids who might never have considered it otherwise." A year later, I was working a night shift when I heard familiar voices in the hallway. Dr. Kellerman was walking with Tyler, now 22 and starting his first clinical rotations as a medical student. "Remember," Dr. Kellerman was saying, "every family here is living through the worst time of their lives. Your job isn't just to treat the disease, it's to help them find hope in the darkness." "Like you did for us," Tyler replied. "Like we did for each other," his father corrected. I watched them walk toward the children's ward together, the teacher who became a doctor and the patient who became a healer. In 7th grade, we'd thought we were witnessing someone's ending. We never imagined we were seeing the beginning of something beautiful. That night, I found myself thinking about all the rumors from middle school. How many of them had contained grains of truth we'd been too young to understand? How many teachers, parents, and adults in our lives had been fighting battles we couldn't see? The next morning, as I finished my shift, I walked past room 314, the same room where I'd first seen Dr. Kellerman years ago. Through the window, I could see Tyler sitting with a little girl who couldn't have been older than 6. She was bald from chemotherapy, but she was laughing as Tyler showed her how to make a paper airplane. "Watch this," he was saying. "My dad taught me this trick when I was about your age." The airplane soared across the room in a perfect arc, and the little girl clapped with delight. For a moment, she looked like any other kid playing on any other day. Not a patient in a pediatric oncology ward, just a child who'd learned that paper could fly. That's when I understood what Dr. Kellerman had meant about everything happening for a reason. Tyler's illness had been terrible, senseless, unfair. But it had also created 2 doctors who understood that healing wasn't just about medicine. It was about hope, humor, and helping people remember that they were more than their disease. Dr. Kellerman appeared in the doorway, watching his son with obvious pride. "How's she doing?" he asked Tyler quietly. "Better. The new treatment protocol is working. Her parents are cautiously optimistic." "And how are you doing?" Tyler smiled. "Good. Really good. It's strange being on this side of things, but it feels right." Dr. Kellerman nodded. "It gets easier. The first few patients are always hard when you've been where they are. Any advice? Trust your instincts. Your experience as a patient gives you insight that textbooks can't teach. Use it." I slipped away before they noticed me, but their conversation stayed with me. 2 people who'd started as patient and parent, now working side by side to help other families navigate the same journey. Later that week, I attended Tyler's white coat ceremony. Medical students across the country received their first white coats in a formal ceremony marking their transition from classroom learning to clinical practice. Tyler's class was small, only 40 students, but the auditorium was packed with family and friends. When Tyler's name was called, Dr. Kellerman was the one who helped him into his coat. It was a tradition for family members or mentors to participate in the ceremony, but seeing father and son together on that stage was particularly moving. "Tyler Kellerman," the dean announced, "will be specializing in pediatric oncology." The applause was thunderous. Dr. Kellerman's colleagues from the hospital had come to support Tyler, and several of our old classmates had driven in for the ceremony. After the formal program, Tyler gave a brief speech that had everyone in tears. 15 years ago, I was a 6-year-old cancer patient," he began. "I was scared, confused, and fighting for my life. My father was a middle school science teacher who spent his days teaching kids about the wonders of the natural world, then his nights researching experimental treatments and insurance options." He paused, looking directly at his father. "He could have let my illness destroy our family. Instead, he let it transform him. He became the doctor he needed when I was sick. And now I get to become the doctor I needed when I was 6. Tyler's voice grew stronger as he continued. "To the families here tonight who are supporting future doctors, thank you for understanding that medicine isn't just a career, it's a calling. To my fellow students, Remember that behind every patient is a family that needs our compassion as much as our clinical expertise. And to my dad, thank you for showing me that our worst experiences can become our greatest strengths. The standing ovation lasted several minutes. I looked around the auditorium and saw the faces of people who understood that they were witnessing something special. Not just a young man receiving his white coat, but the completion of a circle that had begun with a little boy's diagnosis 15 years earlier. After the ceremony, there was a reception where families mingled with faculty and students. I found myself in conversation with some of Tyler's classmates, who were eager to hear about Dr. Kellerman's teaching days. He talks about you guys all the time, one student told me, how his former students kept him grounded during Tyler's treatment, how teaching you made him realize he wanted to spend his life helping people understand complex information. Another student added, he's the best attending we have. He never gets impatient with questions, no matter how basic, and he has this way of explaining things that makes everything click. As the evening wound down, I found myself alone with Dr. Kellerman and Tyler. So what's next? I asked Tyler. 4 years of medical school, then residency, he replied. Dad's already promised to help me navigate pediatric oncology training. And you? I asked Dr. Kellerman. Continue what I'm doing. Treat patients, mentor students, expand the school program. He smiled. And maybe write a book about the intersection of teaching and healing. I'd read that, I said. You'd probably be quoted in it, Tyler added. Dad has stories about all of you, how you helped him through the hardest time of his life without even knowing it. As we said our goodbyes, Dr. Kellerman handed me a small wrapped package. What's this? Open it. Inside was a photo of our 7th grade science class, the one taken for the yearbook. We were all gathered around a lab table, smiling at the camera. Mr. Kellerman stood behind us, young and hopeful, with no idea what the next few months would bring. On the back, he'd written, "To the students who saved their teacher, thank you for helping me find my way." Dr. David Kellerman, where did you get this? I asked. I've carried it with me since I left Roosevelt, he said. Through pre-med classes, medical school, residency, everything. When things got difficult, I'd look at it and remember why I started this journey. Because of Tyler. Because of Tyler, he agreed, but also because of all of you. You taught me that caring for people during their most vulnerable moments is the most important thing you can do with your life. The rumor we'd spread in 7th grade was that our teacher was dying. The truth was that he was learning how to save lives. Sometimes those are the same thing. 5 years later, I received an invitation in the mail. Dr. Tyler Kellerman was graduating from medical school and beginning his residency in pediatric oncology at Children's Hospital. The graduation ceremony would be followed by a celebration, and all of his father's former students were invited. I arrived at the hospital auditorium to find it packed with familiar faces. Tessa was there with her photographer husband, still chasing stories, but now focusing on positive human interest pieces. Brianna had become a teacher herself, inspired by her memories of Mr. Kellerman's classroom. Madison worked in healthcare administration, helping families navigate insurance issues, a career choice directly influenced by Tyler's story. Marcus had become a research scientist, studying childhood cancer. Jennifer was a social worker specializing in family crisis intervention. Derek worked for a nonprofit that provided support to families of pediatric cancer patients. Look at all of us, Tessa marveled as we gathered before the ceremony. Mr. Kellerman's influence didn't end when he left Roosevelt. It's still rippling through our lives. The graduation ceremony was emotional. When Tyler received his diploma, Dr. Kellerman was visibly proud. But the moment that broke everyone was when Tyler was awarded the Outstanding Student in Pediatric Oncology Award. This award, Tyler said in his acceptance speech, represents not just 4 years of studying, but a lifetime of learning what it means to face cancer with courage. I learned that lesson when I was 6 years old, and I've been preparing to pay it forward ever since. After the ceremony, Tyler found our group. I can't believe you all came, he said, looking genuinely moved. We wouldn't have missed it, Brianna replied. You're basically our little brother. We've been rooting for you since 7th grade. Even though you didn't know I existed then? Tyler laughed. Oh, we knew, Tessa said. We might not have known your name, but we knew Mr. Kellerman was fighting for someone he loved. That someone was you. Dr. Kellerman joined our group, and for a moment, it felt like we were back in that middle school classroom, gathered around the lab table, discovering something amazing. So, Marcus asked Tyler, what's your first day as a resident going to be like? Terrifying, Tyler replied honestly, but Dad will be there. We're going to be working together officially for the first time. Any advice for him? Madison asked Dr. Kellerman. Same advice I'd give any new resident, he replied. Remember that medicine is both science and art. The science you can learn from books. The art you learn from patients. And remember, Tyler added, grinning at his father, that sometimes the teacher becomes the student, and the student becomes the teacher. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversation with the little girl I'd seen Tyler with years earlier, now 11 and cancer-free, attending the celebration with her family. Dr. Tyler taught me how to make paper airplanes, she told me proudly, and when I was scared about procedures, he'd tell me stories about when he was little and had to have the same things done. Did that help? A lot. It made me feel like if he could get through it and become a doctor, maybe I could get through it too. Later, as the celebration wound down, I found myself on the hospital's rooftop garden with Dr. Kellerman and Tyler, looking out over the city lights. Do you ever think about alternate timelines? I asked. What would have happened if things had been different? Sometimes, Dr. Kellerman admitted. But then I think about all the families we've helped, all the children who are alive because Tyler inspired me to change careers, all the medical students who chose pediatric oncology because they heard our story. The ripple effects, Tyler added. Every life we save goes on to touch other lives. Every family we help goes on to help other families. And it all started with a group of 7th graders who cared enough to notice that their teacher was struggling, Dr. Kellerman said, who became better students because they thought I was dying, not knowing that their kindness was actually helping keep me alive. The next morning, Tyler began his residency. I watched through the pediatric ward windows as he made rounds with his father, now officially Dr. Kellerman and Dr. Kellerman. They moved through the halls with the same gentle confidence, the same patient demeanor, the same ability to make frightened families feel understood and cared for. That afternoon, I received a text from Tyler. First day down. Dad was right. The art is harder than the science, but I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And I realized that sometimes rumors are true in ways we never expected. Sometimes the saddest stories become the most hopeful ones. And sometimes the teacher who changes your life in middle school comes back 15 years later to change it again, along with his son who grew up to change other lives in turn. The rumor we'd spread in 7th grade was that our teacher was dying. The truth was that he was learning to heal. And sometimes, the most beautiful stories begin with the worst possible circumstances.